everybody to Equals. I'm Max.
Welcome everybody, this is Nabil. We're thrilled to bring you today an interview between Winnie and Professor Joseph Stiglitz, one of the world's foremost thinkers on inequality.
So when did you first come across Joseph Stiglitz then, Nabil?
Right, Max, I've got to tell you, and this might feel a little bit like a confession, it's about 2008, and I've just finished the last chapter of a book by Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman,
who's...
So you read a lot of his work then?
I did, Max. I think it's important to be able to read and understand perspectives from all sides, and he is...
Right, yeah, okay.
So I'd finished, and I was attracted to his ideas about freedom, especially you can say as a capitalist business student, but it was... Upon reading Professor Joseph Stiglitz, that I really had my mind open to, I think, the defining feature of our global economy, which is its extreme inequality. And this was someone with intellectual heft who was able to deconstruct many of others' arguments and show another way.
Yeah, I mean, he really is one of the godfathers of inequality studies. I mean, for me, I came to Joe Stiglitz as an old man. I remember the huge protests in 2001, 2002, hundreds of thousands of people protesting against globalisation. And Joe Stiglitz, he stormed out of the World Bank in protest against the way the IMF and the World Bank were treating developing countries. And he was a real hero. His book, Globalisation and Its Discontents, was a Bible for us back then. And he's continued to be a real guru in this area.
A guru, and can I also say, Max, I'm witness to how he's also not just a Nobel Laureate thinker and so on, but also someone who's able to combine that with his activism. A couple of years ago, I was in New York with Winnie, and we were part of a report that really took on the big pharmaceutical companies for using patents to drive up prices to medicines, which really is killing people, right?
Yeah, it is killing people.
And it really, and a couple of governments in that arena, they stood up to try to slam the report. And it was an interesting moment because out of nowhere, Professor Stiglitz stood up, line by line, deconstructed their arguments. And it was a really powerful show of this Nobel Laureate activist economist taking on corporate power.
That is an amazing story. He is an amazing man. And let's listen to the interview.
So first, Joe, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start here. What, in your view, is the scale of economic inequality in the world today? What are the trends? And how does it compare with previous periods in history?
Well, inequality has grown enormously, particularly since the beginning around 1980, about 45 years ago. Before that, there was a trend within most countries, most advanced countries, of a decline in inequality. There was actually an economic law called Kuznets law. Simon Kuznets got a Nobel Prize for his work, which argued that in early stages of development, inequality grows. There are some people who are able to take advantage of the new opportunities and their incomes grow faster than the rest. But then in the second stage, inequality decreases as those who were behind catch up. And that was the pattern when Kuznets wrote in the 1950s. No one then could have anticipated what began to happen in the era of Thatcher and Reagan, where inequality started to grow and grow and grow. The one good aspect of global inequality is that there has been a growth in a number of emerging markets, particularly the largest emerging markets, China, India, and they've closed the gap, reduced the gap between the advanced countries and themselves.
I remember those days of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. I was a student at university in the UK, and the change was quite sudden because the narrative shifted, and people were called yuppies, and it was suddenly very fashionable to be greedy, really, to maximize for yourself, to advance yourself at the cost of other people. There was like a new way of thinking that has now grown and grown until now it's unchallenged. What do you think?
Yes, you're absolutely right. This was the era in the United States. There was a famous movie with a character called Gordon Gekko who talked about greed is good. In terms of politics, Reagan said that deregulate, cut tax rates on the rich, and the economy will grow so much that those in the middle, those at the bottom will be better off than they otherwise would have been. So the view was, yes, the economic pie will be more inequitably shared, but the pie will be so much bigger that no one can complain. It was an idea called trickle-down economics. Well, it didn't work out that way. We've had now more than 4 decades of what might be called an economic experiment, and that experiment has failed. Growth is actually significantly slower than it was in the decades after World War II. Increase in inequality, that was delivered. And what that has meant that in most advanced countries and many middle-income countries, the growth of inequality is so large that those at the bottom, even those at the middle, are not doing very well. Their incomes have stagnated. Those without education credentials have actually seen their incomes decrease.
It's terrible. So we have this small top elite that has a different morality, that they talk to each other and influence each other and are amoral for the rest of us, isn't it?
Well, I think, let me try to be fair to them. Many of them actually believe that what we're doing would actually help everybody. But they were so out of touch with what was going on that they didn't see that what they were doing was not was leading people in misery.
You know, I want you to tell us some more about this, because I started seeing, and it's now common thinking, that if you're not doing well, it's because you're not working hard enough.
Well, first I'd say when I look at some of the people at the bottom and look how hard they work, and I compare that to how many days Donald Trump spends on the golf course, there's no comparison. The people at the bottom, many of them are working extraordinarily hard, often in back-breaking work. So it's not a result of lack of effort. Many of those people that have not been doing very well have looked for jobs, have looked and looked, searched, and there just aren't any jobs. So that in many countries around the world, there is what we call, economists call it, involuntary unemployment. People would like to work, they just can't get a decent job. A few years ago, I wrote a book, The Price of Inequality. I titled it The Price of Inequality precisely because I wanted to emphasize that we are paying an enormous price for the high levels of inequality that we have in the United States and in many other countries. And I try to delineate in that book the various mechanisms that led to that poor economic performance. And some of them are obvious, some of them are a little bit more complicated. Let me give you an example of some of the more obvious ones. Countries with high levels of inequality, like the United States, one aspect of it is that there is systematically less equality of opportunity. That is to say, the life prospects of a young American are more dependent on the income and education of his parents than most other advanced countries around the world. But what does that mean? That means a young American born of poor parents or even middle-income parents won't be able to get the education to live up to his potential. He may not even be able to get the health care that he needs to prevent some disease that will impair his productivity during the rest of his life. So that is one channel by which inequality really hampers economic prosperity. And other channels relate to the particular ways that inequality is created. In the United States, one of the sources of inequality is the high level of market power, corporate power. And the consequence of the abuse of market power is to lead to less investment, less aggregate demand, lower incomes. It shifts the distribution of income from ordinary citizens to the owners of these corporate giants. Then is a political dimension. High levels of economic inequality in a democracy or even a quasi-democracy, it gets translated into high levels of political inequality. And those with economic power use their political power to make sure that taxes are low, and that in turn results in underinvestment in the public, in technology and infrastructure and education, all of which leads to lower overall growth for the economy. So there are a large number of reasons that higher inequality is systematically related to poor economic performance.
You know, the first time I heard your name was when you were working at the World Bank many years ago and you resigned in protest at the way the IMF and was pushing East Asian countries to adopt neoliberal policies that you found dangerous. Tell me a bit about why inequality is bad for our polity.
Whenever you have high levels of economic inequality, it results in political inequality in almost any economic system. And those at the top will use the political system not to advance the interests of the country as a whole, but to advance their own interests. Sometimes that's called capture. And the result of that is that you wind up with a more divided society, more divided politics. There's another dimension I should mention, which is more subtle, which is sometimes called cognitive capture. When you have an elite that has been very successful and has a lot of political power, they talk to each other, they develop a set of beliefs, even when they are not pursuing their private interest. They don't have what I would call a balanced view of society, the economy, or politics.
Perhaps your last thought for our podcast on what is the big challenge that we should focus on today? There's so many battles, they're all connected. Where would you put your finger?
You're absolutely right. We're facing a number of very interrelated battles: poverty and inequality, climate change, corruption. To me, the only way we are going to be successful in winning these battles is through the political process. And that's why I think our energies should be focused on restoring our democracies. And that's where civil society is absolutely essential to mobilize our citizens, and in particular young people, make sure they get out to vote, make sure that they may express their views, their strong views on these very important issues that will affect them for the rest of their lives.
For me as an activist, I wanted to ask you one more question, which is how do you see this fight that we are in against inequality? Are you optimistic? Are you hopeful?
Well, the power of money is obvious. The power of the voices of ordinary individuals is overwhelmed normally by money. And it's only by people acting together that we can counteract the power of money, the power of corporations. And that's what civil society is about. It's about collective action of ordinary individuals coming together. A single voice is hard to be heard, but when people come together, whether it's to fight poverty or to fight for the environment, it is the only chance we have of overcoming the corporate interest and the interest of money. I have actually some optimism right now, and it's because of young people. I teach at Columbia University, so I get a chance to see over the years how sentiments have changed among the young people. And in the last few years, there's been a major change. The young people have seen how bad things can get if they don't get engaged, that they become more engaged politically. They become more engaged in civil society and activist groups. And they have begun to grasp the issues of inequality, poverty, the environment, the broad range of what I call progressive issues. So, year by year, the fraction of people who understand the failures of neoliberalism and understand that there has to be an alternative, there is an alternative, what I've called progressivism, their numbers will increase. I just hope they increase fast enough that the damage being done by some of the extremists on the right will not be permanent.
I agree with you. I see that they get it even better than my generation. The fact that they are organizing, speaking about inequality, extreme inequality, and connecting it to environmental destruction, climate change, and to politics that are captured and that, they are intersectional. They are pulling all this together. They know so well that it's the same elite group of powerful people running the economy and running our governments who are roasting the planet and hurting the lives of ordinary people. They see it as one struggle. That makes me hopeful too. Power to you, Joseph Stiglitz. I think it was your Justice Louis Brandeis, your Supreme Court, who once said that you can have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few people, and you can have democracy, but you can't have both. I couldn't agree with you more that it's about claiming our power back and organizing to claim it back. I want to thank you so much, not just for this podcast, Joe, but for working with us, with me and with Oxfam, and letting us draw from your wealth of knowledge and you lending your influence, your work to this cause. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and keep up your good work.
Max, that was great to listen to. What do you take from that interview?
Well, many things. What an amazing man. But I think one of the things that really caught my imagination is the way that money is used, or the extreme wealth is used to capture politics, so that society is no longer run for the benefit of the majority, but it's instead run in the interests of a wealthy minority. I thought he was very powerful in talking about that.
I think you're right, Max, and I think we really need to unpack this, that extreme wealth isn't just buying priceless works of arts and super yachts and underground swimming pools and whatever else the super rich like to buy, but we're also seeing that it's buying politics, it's buying appliant media, it's buying the judiciary, and that is really frightening from the perspective of an equal and fair society.
Yeah, I think that's the key point he's making, that money turns itself into politics, turns itself into power, and that's dangerous and shapes the economy in dangerous ways. I mean, look at the way money is used to control the media all over the world. Printing lies, putting out untruths that are distracting whole populations, leading to a rise in racism, a rise in fascist views, really scary stuff. And a lot of that has big money behind it, and a lot of it has its origins in inequality, I think.
Yeah, and it's all the while it's distracting people from billionaires' own bad behaviour, really, at the heart of it.
Exactly. It's kind of look over their politics.
Max, the other thing I really took from the interview with Professor Stiglitz, he talked about political capture, but he also really profoundly talked about this idea of cognitive capture and this capture of ideas. We've really seen how the ideology of neoliberalism over the last 40 years or so has really presented itself as the only game in town, as the new mainstream.
Definitely. There's a famous guy called Frank Luntz who writes about shaping imagination, shaping ideas with words, and he said famously that if you can be defined as common sense, then you've basically won. And I think for 40 years we've had this economic doctrine that's masqueraded as common sense, and what Stiglitz is very strong on is he points out there is no economic evidence that neoliberalism, that liberating markets, deregulating, privatising, that these things work. They don't. Trickle-down economics, as he said, doesn't work. But the problem is, it's still going.
And Max, I can't think of the number of politicians and economists and so many others that we've come across can't really think beyond this intellectual straitjacket of neoliberalism. But why do you think that such a discredited economic kind of mainstream still stands so strongly?
I think it's really interesting. It's a zombie doctrine. It's been discredited by the financial crisis. It's been discredited by many economists like Stiglitz. But it's like a zombie. It's very hard to kill. It's still stumbling onwards. And, politicians, elites still look to the pieces of neoliberalism like lowering taxes, for instance, funding tax havens. It's still going on. And what's needed is a strong alternative, a strong alternative story. That's the thing that will kill neoliberalism in the end.
Max, look, I'm a seeker of hope, and I really see over the last few years, and I think people like Joe Stiglitz have played a big part in this, we're really seeing the emergence of a new set of economic ideas and even ideals, I'd say. You look at the global Green New Deal, you look at the universal basic income, you look at how New Zealand, for example, now is looking at their economy beyond the narrow prism of GDP, but looking at well-being. You look at new forms of business, the elimination of the gender pay gap. I'm trying to feel that there's a really emergence of a new story for the economy there.
I think the pieces are there of something new, and I thought Stiglitz's answer on hope was really inspiring, because I think young people in particular certainly don't buy the old story. They don't buy the neoliberal story. And they do have enormous enthusiasm for these new ways of doing things. I think it needs to be pulled together more in one cohesive story. But I do find inspiration in that. I agree with you.
Max, thank you. That nicely brings us to a close for today's episode. Now, I'm super chuffed to say that earlier today we were able to meet with a government leader, the leader of a nation that's been actively fighting inequality, bringing down economic inequality every single year since 1993. He's one of our guests we have lined up. Our next episode is out in a couple of weeks. We hope you join us there for the next episode of Equals. Thank you.
Thank you.